So we're going to get started now, and we've got a kind of unique question for each of the candidates. Oh, one thing I should mention is that none of the candidates have seen these questions before. This is all coming fresh, and it's going to be off the cuff, and it's going to be very dynamic and live and exciting. So I've got a candidate for each of the a question for each of the candidates to kick us off, which will go to each of the candidates in turn, starting with Nick. So Nick, you've talked a lot in the campaign about being relatively new to politics. What makes you think you've got the necessary skills and experience to be the deputy leader?
So I am new to politics. I only realised that politics was a useful way to make change when I was 21. Before then, I thought what a lot of people did, what a lot of people still think, I imagine, which is you vote for one party, they get in, they do some things, maybe they don't, the other party criticises them, and then sometimes they switch positions. And that's just the inevitability of politics in the UK. I think that politics at its heart is about people working together and people wanting to do good and make good things and make society work for everyone. So I genuinely think that motivation enough and caring enough is what it takes to be a good politician. I think having self-discipline, like being able to admit where you're wrong and admit where you need to know more and learn more, is really important. And I think having a political figure that isn't afraid to sometimes say, oh, I got that wrong there, I think that's really important for the public to see, to have faith in politics again. Because at the end of the day, if we want people to vote for us, they need to know that we're people and not this far off distant establishment that decides how their life should be.
Brilliant, thank you, Nick. So the next question I've got is for Cleo. So Cleo, you've obviously been active in the party locally for quite some time with your role as a councillor and Lord Mayor, but you haven't had so much of a nationally facing role. What makes you think you're suited to jump straight into the deputy leadership?
Yeah, I think I've proved within the roles that I have held that I've used those positions to connect internationally and nationally. So I'm very confident in doing that. I think I'm an excellent representative for the party and for the new face of the party as we go into a new phase. So I think I have got international press on a number of occasions, which has raised my profile, but it's more importantly not raising my profile, it's raising the profile of the issues that matter to people. And that is obviously the main thing when you are a spokesperson in terms of getting press. I am very keen to link with all the various regional parties and city parties and others where we have elected councillors and where we don't, quite frankly, to understand what the unique position is within the different areas and within the different parties, because what we're really aiming for is cohesion and unity. And even between Wales and England, I would like to find out more about how we work together. I am based in Bristol, so that's relatively close to Wales. And of course, we can now have the option of working digitally. So it's very much for me about linking, also with linking international campaigns that are led by other people that we can collaborate with. And essentially as well, which I consider being key, is working with trade unions and supporting different parties to have that link in to a working relationship with trade unions whereby we can better lobby for the changes that people want to enjoy.
Brilliant, thank you, Cleo. So my third question goes to Tom. So Tom, you've not had a background of holding elective office, so why do you think that you're suitable to be in the deputy leadership position without that background?
And it's something that has come up, I've seen like on social media, about whether it's a good idea to have party leaders who haven't held elected office. And I think this is something that's slightly unique to the Green Party, that we elect leaders who don't hold political office. Like I'm fairly certain that Jonathan didn't hold political office when he got elected as co-leader. I have, however, stood in quite a wide variety of political contexts. So like I've stood first in Plymouth, and then Watford and Rickmansworth, and in where else have I stood? In South West Hertfordshire for Parliament and in Essex. So I've stood in like a variety of rural, urban, Conservative, Labour areas, and also I've had quite a lot of experience from working with grassroots activists, which is probably what I've mainly done, and also in Parliament, influencing MPs and peers and shadow ministers and trying to influence change in the government. So I feel like I've got quite a broad range of experience rather than in a specific area. Like, obviously, it'd be great to get elected to public office, but I don't think I haven't made up for it in the rest of my experience. Also professionally, because I've worked for a think tank and for the wind energy industry and for small campaign groups, and I currently work for a pan-European climate innovation initiative. So yeah, I think I've got a pretty broad range of experience, and I don't think really in the Green Party we can afford to limit our leadership candidates to those who hold public office, because we do have a broad range of experience in people who don't.
Brilliant, thanks Tom. And then finally for Amelia, so you've been deputy leader for 6 years now, which is longer than anyone else in a leadership or deputy leadership post. What would you say to people who would argue that it's time for fresh leadership?
One of the things that we often fall short on in the Green Party is an institutional knowledge about how we build strategy and win campaigns. I've been there now for 3 general elections, although I should have only have just finished my 2nd general election if it hadn't been for the 2 snap general elections that we've had. I've built our strategy and worked at the grassroots, and I think it's important that we build on strong foundations. We talk about working internationally and building with trade unions, and this is work that I've already done. And just today, I had a release with the Musicians Union on UBI and artists. It's those foundations and that institutionalized knowledge that we can't lose. And I think that it's really important that with the general election in 2024, yes, it might seem like a long way off, but it's the work now that is done now and delivered now that will pay off. We have a bumpy year of elections next year, with the elections that should have taken place this year and the usual scheduled ones for 2021. That includes mayoral campaigns, the council elections, London Assembly, and as well as the Welsh Parliament elections. And we need to be making sure that we're delivering success in what will be quite a tough time for us. And I think that with my knowledge, skills and experience that have already taken us to some of the biggest wins in the history of our party, with the 3 biggest general election results, the biggest European election result and council election wins that have been unprecedented for us, it's vitally important that those skills and experiences are embedded to ensure that we're building for our bumpy year of elections, as well as to a future general election.
Brilliant, thank you, Amelia. So we've had a few people join the call since we kicked off. So I'm just going to, and also more people joining us on Facebook. Hello, Facebook people. So I'm just going to briefly reiterate a couple of things before I move on to the next question. Firstly, just to say, for those of you who are in the Zoom call, please just keep the chat for questions. We're going to come to questions in the chat later on. So start getting them down now and I'll start pulling them together. Unfortunately, we won't be able to take questions from Facebook. The other thing just to note is that there will be opportunities for candidates to come back to each other on certain points, and we'll hopefully have some back and forth on some of the questions on some of the kind of thorny issues that we'll be discussing within. But before we get to those questions, so I've got another question which is going to be put to all of you, which is, it kind of relates to a question that's been sort of bubbling up around the leadership campaign and the deputy leadership campaign over the last couple of weeks. So the question is really whether or not the Green Party should position itself as a left-wing party. So my question to you is, do you think the Green Party is a party of the left? I'm going to start with Cleo on that one.
Yes, I do. I definitely perceive the Green Party to be on the left. I would not have joined otherwise because that is my ethos. But I am more aware that a variety of different people are Green Party members coming from various different, political origins, if you like. So I think that whilst there is broad appeal, I think the challenge is, or perhaps the work may have been happening, is how we align people with issues in kind. And if I can just give a practical example of what I'm trying to say, I was part of a forum on Saturday, actually, before the other hustings, based in Bristol, obviously online, and it was people who were concerned about air quality. And it was people representing different organisations. And there were, we went into breakout rooms, had our discussions, talked about the problem. And there was one lady in our group who was from, I'd say, an affluent area of Bristol, probably an elder, I'm pretty sure. She didn't want to go on camera. And you could hear the just sheer kind of fear, terror, someone who was really, really scared about illegal levels of air pollution in her community, which, and the realization that actually for it to be taken seriously by our administration, and I'm sure the case in other areas up and down the country, what it takes now is for people who are having these discussions or enduring health inequalities in the communities that are hit hardest by air pollution, that they are empowered to come to the front of this movement and lead this movement, make their voices heard, because otherwise we run the danger of some people in office thinking that either campaigners are just privileged and they won't be listened to because they're not reflective of the communities at large. We have to know that argument. We have to get far more diversity at the forefront, because we know that people from certain social economic backgrounds and other people of colour are suffering the worst. And until that's seen, I don't think some administrations will act as much as they can on the pressing issues like air quality that are affecting so many people. And that woman's trembling voice stays with me. But what also stays with me is the fact that her and other people are coming from very different backgrounds, but we're aligning on the issues that should matter to the majority of us, regardless of what wealth we may or may not have, especially when we're talking about saving the planet.
Brilliant, thanks Cleo. And some of those things that you've mentioned there, we're going to pick up in questions later. I'm going to go to Amelia next. So Amelia, do you think that the Green Party is a party of the left?
Absolutely, and I'm a proud eco-socialist, and I think and work as co-chair of the People's Assembly as well as my role as deputy leader. I think it's really interesting, this question, because clearly our policies are left-wing. We want to dismantle the current economic order because it doesn't work for people or for planet. Our economy is built on the environment, and it's people that turn those goods and our environment into the goods and resources that create business and therefore create the economy. I think we're strong because of the fact that we take all of these aspects of how our economy is essentially built into account. We reflect the fact that it's everything we do is built on the environment and built on the labour of people, and everybody deserves real workers' rights to ensure that we have a strong system for everybody. We need to ensure that we address inequalities while staying below 1.5 degrees of warming. But I appreciate why people say we're not left, we're not right, but we're progressive, because we have radical yet rational politics and policies. And effectively, when we're talking about those rational policies, people understand why we're challenging those bigger issues. I've travelled the country and I've met people who are used to vote Conservative that have now joined the Green Party. And often it's for similar reasons. One of them being that they've recently had grandchildren and they want to tackle the climate emergency. And the other is that they want to support genuine local business. And they do not believe that the neoliberal agenda that is currently embedded within the Conservative Party actually represents community needs. They can be, it's those rational policies that we have that they see reflected in their values. And I think it's important that we build on that and ensure that we're talking about everybody's rights, addressing inequality, and reflect the fact that we have the best policies because we're talking about so many different aspects of how we make our society and our communities stronger.
Brilliant, thank you, Amelia. I'm going to bring in Tom next. Is the Green Party a party of the left, Tom?
Yes, it is, Chris. Yeah, we've agreed on a policy platform as members because the Green Party decides all policies democratically by our members, and our policy platform involves a deliberate undoing of neoliberal institutions in pursuit of a sustainable society for the common good. We don't necessarily say that, but that is what we're doing. And we don't necessarily need to say that. I thought Natalie Bennett did a fantastic job at positioning us as the uniquely anti-austerity party when Ed Miliband was the leader of Labour. And when she was our leader and managing to position us as the left party of anti-austerity, we got our best ever general election result, and we re-elected Caroline Lucas with a massive majority. But as I said, this doesn't mean we need to use words like capitalism and neoliberalism and eco-socialism, even though we do feel passionately about those things. Those things can so easily put people off, I know. It's all well and good us having a conversation here about it, but it doesn't necessarily work on the doorstep, and you can find ways to communicate those things in a way that people understand and feel warmly towards. We are also entering the second economic crisis of many of our lives, and people often feel like they can't do anything about environmentalism because their time is taken up by making sure they can put food on the table. And so we need to do things like highlight our economic justice policies, such as a living wage, universal basic income, and investment in public services, because people want to hear those things, and we do believe in them. We have those as our policies and they're fantastic. So I think we need to do a better job, like how Natalie Bennett did, of linking up the interdependencies of social justice with environmental justice. And with that, we would be positioning ourselves as a left party, which I think is what we are.
I was on mute then.
Yeah.
So thank you, Tom. I'll repeat myself. Nick, you're at Blast. Is the Green Party a party of the left?
We are obviously a party of the left. In policy, it's obvious that we are left-wing. I just think it's important that we make sure the messaging we're putting out there remembers that people that vote Conservative and vote Labour aren't the same as people that are members of those parties. A lot of people are undecided when it comes to each election. They can swing either side each election. I remember seeing a Victoria Derbyshire episode where there were people in the room that weren't sure whether they were going to vote Labour or Conservative. I didn't think it was possible to consider two options that I see as so very different from each other. So I think it's really important that we are left-wing, and that's true, but I think we need to get our messaging right to make sure that we're communicating in a way where people aren't turning away already, because we have amazing policies that most people will support. We've seen it in that blind study that we all have to reference, that on policy, the Green Party would win. We have the policy that is great. We just had to make sure we get to the point where people are willing to listen to it. So taking any steps we can to make sure people don't turn away before we can explain the policy, I think we should definitely be doing in order to make sure we can get votes, get elected, and then actually make those policies happen. I think if we continue to try and appeal just to people that have left Labour or people that already put left and socialist in their Twitter bios, I don't think we're ever going to have the kind of outreach that we need in order to get that electoral success. And our job as the Green, as the political part of the Green movement, is to have that electoral success. We have to chase that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nick. So I'm going to move on to some more specific questions. These have been submitted in advance by people who registered for this event. So the first one is kind of an amalgamation of different bits and pieces that a number of people have sent in, including Victoria Merry and Matthew Smith. Shout out to you if you're on the call or on Facebook. There's a couple of different questions they put forward on young people and how the Green Party can engage with young people. So on the one hand, one of these questions came in asking about how we show young people who aren't interested in politics the Greens are the party for them, and to engage and mobilise those young people. And on the other hand, we've got a generation of young people who are being highly politicised, not least around climate change, with the youth strikes for climate and the school strikes and so on. How do we ensure that those young people see the Green Party as a vehicle for their politics and a vehicle for change. So there's kind of two questions in there. You can have, as I said before, like a reasonable amount of time on this because it's quite a meaty question. This time I am going to start with Amelia.
Thank you. I think I'm often asked why the Green Party has the best policies for young people. And I always say it's because young people are at the forefront of writing many of those policies and are part of our policy making process. I'm always proud of what we achieve with that, with things like scrapping, not just scrapping student fees, but actually scrapping student debt and actually challenging the economic systems that mean that actually people are getting a worse deal on middle incomes. That means as a result of the way that we pay back our student loans. I think that it's really important that we have young people who are elected representing young people, their generation. When I first got involved in politics, well, the reason that I first ran to be deputy leader was because I was being invited to events for the under 30s based on, as a young candidate, based on the fact that the under 30s were young and didn't tend to vote. And then I was being invited to events for the under 35s based on the fact that the under 35s are young and the under 35s tend not to vote. And I was also getting invited to the events for the under 40s based on the fact that the under 40s are young because the under 40s are underrepresented and tend not to vote. And it frustrated me because I hate that terminology that you have about an apolitical generation that's directed at young people today, when in fact what we're heading towards is an apolitical population, because it's down to politicians like us to ensure that we're giving hope to people about what the future is and what we can create as a change of policy in our country. And I think it's vital that we're acknowledging that and actually making sure that we're talking about those issues that are relevant to young people, but also support young people to be part of that conversation. I'm always dedicated to making sure that I'm supporting young Greens getting elected. I think having come from being a young candidate myself, I see the power of diversity and voice in our council chambers and in our parliaments, in our House of Lords even, and making sure that we're representing the variety of lived experiences that we have. And being young, only somebody who is 18, 19 in 2020 can tell you what that experience is like. So I think when it comes to the climate strikes, what I found really powerful for the events that I visited, I don't like going to these events and then speaking because I feel like it should be about youth voices, but I have been invited to them and I have spoken to young people who have become Green Party members. And I think it's about how we support and encourage those voices to be heard within, not just within our movement, but within politics as well. I think it is so vital that we are supporting young Greens, young people, young voices to ensure that we're challenging a system that effectively has undermined young people for far too long, whether that was an austerity agenda that stripped away young people. I always say young people experience the brunt of the cuts, which you always have to say quite carefully. And effectively, I think it's central to any party, should be central to any party, but I'm always proud of the work that we do in the Greens to make sure that we support young people. And I want to continue to that because another phrase that frustrates me is young people are the future. Young people are the now and the present, and we need to make sure that young people are heard.
Thank you, Amelia. I'm now going to put this to Tom.
Thank you. And sorry, I think I didn't mute myself after the last one. Would you mind repeating the question, Chris?
So I guess it comes in two parts. The first part is how do you engage young people who aren't interested or engaged in politics and ensure that they see the Green Party as the party for them and to mobilise them into politics? And the second part is specifically about, I guess, the part of the generation of young people sort of coming through at the moment who have been highly politicised, particularly around climate change with regards to the climate strikes and so on. How do you mobilise them and make them see that the Green Party as a force for change?
Cool, thank you. I experience this on the doorstep quite a lot, where I'm knocking on the door for like the two names listed, and it's the parents, and like a 16 or 17-year-old comes to the door, and then they're like, "What? Who are you?" Not necessarily used to like having a canvasser knock on the door, and I obviously try and get the parents involved. But if I engage them in conversation, then I will talk about things like the fact that we support free tuition fees, universal basic income, votes to 16, and climate justice. Increasingly, as you said, lots of young people have been politicized, which is great. Lots of young people getting interested in environmentalism, which is our modus operandi. Also, intergenerational inequality. Young people are entering like jobs and independent life without any prospect necessarily of being able to afford their own home, and are being ripped off by landlords. And those are policies which the Greens are good at, I would say. And we need to make sure that we properly fund the infrastructure behind the Young Greens, because if the Young Greens can properly fund themselves and get a decent breadth of representation, then that can make the party a lot more attractive to young people, I think. I think that when people think about young people in politics, they often more go to Young Conservatives and Young Labour, whereas we've got a great selection of talent in the Young Greens, and we have a long history of things like training programmes. If we invest in that properly, I think that we can do very well. And also, getting involved in the Greens as a young person can lead to you being a candidate and being able to directly challenge establishment figures who tend to be older. So I've thoroughly enjoyed being at hustings where there's some middle-aged Conservative candidate, and I'm able to directly challenge them on their policies, particularly on things like climate change and anti-austerity. And you can do that. You can just do that if you join the Green Party, which is one of the things I would try to say. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Tom. So to Nick now.
Yeah, when it comes to first reaching non-political people, I have direct experience of that growing up and just thinking it was all terrible. I think people have that experience. I never did politics GCSE. I didn't even do history GCSE. So even the kind of semi-political stuff you get through there, I didn't get. So I understand why people can end up in the situation they are, where they think that politics is a complete waste of time. And I think we just need to work out how we can get the messaging right to make sure those people feel included. Team with the climate strikes, a really great example of how individual people, as long as they're organized in a huge number, have so much power, and every person that turns up to that event makes a huge difference. I think a lot of it will have been down to when we get closer to elections. Obviously, it needs to be an ongoing process, and the Young Greens have done some great work on making sure young people are interested in politics along the way. When it comes to elections, I've been really disappointed in the past at our messaging, and particularly when it comes to our party election broadcasts and party political broadcasts, that they're not motivated at all. Like, we need to motivate people to say, you have power, your vote is so huge and can make a huge difference. One of the things I really wish we would have talked about is just saying how if you register to vote and turn up and hand in a slip of paper, you can have a say on the next 5 years what happens in national government. Like, that's incredible in terms of doing a small task and having a huge impact. So I think we really need to find a way to be more motivational and get people excited about politics, which I think our party election broadcasts and party political broadcasts particularly haven't done that in the past, and I think it's a problem.
Thanks, Nick, and finally Cleo.
Yeah, I think how I would approach this is on a few different levels, but I think personally I would make myself very accessible for young people to contact me, ask me any questions. I would hold probably monthly forums where young people from across England and Wales can come and get advice, get support, and to be fair, learn from each other. Because in the last couple of months, I have started mentoring young people, just putting the offer out there to young activists. And I've had some people come forward and I've worked with them. And I think part of it is politicians have, and adults have, sort of continued to in some ways lie and pacify our young people. Promises are often made. We can reflect on the youth climate strikes and the sheer numbers that attracted brilliant work and direct action by our young people and a show of solidarity, but what action has actually come about as a consequence? I don't think there has been enough, not nearly enough. So I think that's a little patronising to the young people. I think if I think about Bristol, we had a motion that was passed in full council over 2 years ago now, saying that we would, when we all agreed as a council, it did come from Greens, but it was unanimously adopted, that we would lobby for votes at 16 and also do a study and research into e-voting. And again, very, very little has actually happened. And I think that was actually in front of our youth council as well. So I think youth councils have their place. I would like to see them renewed and empowered, not just kind of turn up to full council once a year to give us the annual report. I, as Lord Mayor, invited the youth council to be present at every full council and have an agenda item under chair's business. Sadly, they didn't take me up on the offer. I think demystifying the process, the political process, is very important. So I'm actually working now to get resources out there to make it very easy to understand how, if you have an issue that concerns you, and this is for young people, but it's for any age, you know how to put a statement in, a petition, a question, how that works, the language, etc. So people feel that it is something that they can do. Some of the people that I've worked with, young people, they've gone on to set up their own assembly, which is really encouraging. And one of them also has gone on to do her own study of interviews with many people interested in the climate movement and getting perspectives from young activists of colour and others, and seeing where there may be some work to be done in terms of people really understanding the intersectionality of the movement and making sure that happens. People have mentioned Young Greens and the training programs. I would have a look at, this would be one of the first things I would do, I would have a look at all the Young Greens groups across the UK and Wales and have an audit to see how diverse the groups are, and out of all the training that has taken place, how have we done in terms of ethnic diversity and socio-economic background, just to ensure that we are reaching communities who perhaps are in some ways new to politics, but that we're not just always attracting similar people. I think, if I can finish as well, some campaigns can only really be successfully led by young people. And when I say mentoring, actually, it's a two-way process. There's things that young people can learn from us as adults or people in the party or future deputy leaders, but there's also a lot we can learn from them. And I think one of the campaigns I'm talking to with the young people is about fast fashion. And I really think it's going to be young people who are going to drive this campaign. And we've seen it exposed that people are being exploited in our own country for the unnecessary, some would say, rollout of fast fashion. And now the solution to that is that those warehouses and I don't want to say the word I wanted to say, but people who aren't subscribing to what we hold as values in our society, i.e. good working conditions, decent pay, not being exploited, these people are now going to move their operation abroad. So we see the international dimension of this and see that you cannot just shift exploitation from one pillar to a next post, nationally or internationally. These are the big challenges, and I want to work with young people to address them.
Brilliant, thank you, Cleo. So before I move on to our next question, just a couple of things. So firstly, to those of you who are watching on Facebook, we've had lots of you watching on Facebook, that's brilliant, but we want to reach even more people. So if you are watching on Facebook, please do share the live streams so that you can get even more people tuning in and hearing what the deputy leadership candidates have to say. The second thing I want to just quickly say is, we've got about 45 minutes left of this hustings, and we want to get through as many questions as possible. So I'm going to ask candidates, if they can, to be slightly briefer with their answers from here on in. So our next question has come in from a number of different people in advance, and I've also seen a very similar question, similar questions popping in to the chat as well. The question essentially is, do you think that the Green Party needs to have a stronger class analysis And what is your personal analysis of green politics and class? And I'm going to start with Tom on that one.
Could you repeat the first bit of the question again?
Yep. So do you think the Green Party needs to have a stronger class analysis? And what is your personal analysis of green politics and class?
I'm not sure what the term class analysis means, but there should certainly be more class awareness and an awareness of ourselves as a very middle class party. I think that's probably prevented us from being able to more effectively reach out into working class communities. And as I said earlier about social justice and environmental justice, if we can more coherently communicate our politics, which are about intersectional justice and addressing systems of oppression and privilege, then we can do better at, I guess, a class analysis, if that's what it means. Yeah, it would enable us to reach out to more communities, and the communities that we need to be serving, the communities that would massively benefit from our policies, such as universal basic income and a living wage. I'm also pro-union. I don't know if the party is fantastic on unions, to be honest. I'm a member of a union. I think that, as Cleo said earlier, we should do more to integrate ourselves into unions. I can't remember the second part of the question, but I'm hoping I've answered it.
I think you have largely, yep. So I'm now going to go to Cleo.
Right, was it overall, should we have or do we have? Could you just repeat, please?
Yeah, so do you think the Green Party needs to have a stronger class analysis, and what is your personal analysis of green politics and class?
Yeah, I think there needs to be an analysis, as I just referenced in terms of training for young Greens, that could be analysed, and many other spheres, I'm sure. So it's definitely worth doing, but it's only worth doing if you're sure you're going to follow up on the findings and the action that needs to come after it. I think, well, I absolutely believe that we do have policies that are for the benefit of people who are socially or economically deprived and underprivileged in this country. The challenge is, how do we better communicate these and reach these people who would benefit from them? I think some of the issues, not just specific to our party, but widely in society, we're seeing kind of equalities quite rightly put to the front, but we're not really seeing some things labelled or named in terms of policies in other institutions or even in law. So when we think of white underprivilege and social mobility, that is not there's no duty in law to support people who fall under that bracket. They are not referenced in the Equalities Act. So it's about how we are at the forefront now of making it obvious that we do stand for these people, and they don't have a liberation group, for example. Again, I do agree that working with unions is key, because it's cross collaboration. It's not us maybe looking at some of their ideas and running with it. It's about working side by side to gain the trust, respect, and work with the knowledge these different sectors will have that we may not have as much as.
Thanks, Cleo. Jumping over to Nick now.
Yeah, when it comes to class, I think obviously we are, as far as I know, mostly a middle class group of people within the Green Party as a whole. So the problem we have is that the policies we've written are written by the middle class. So it's difficult to get input from people from the working class. Hopefully our policies are good enough and are addressing the concerns of people who are working class. But we need to make sure we're talking about them. We talk so much about the environment. Not that I don't think the environment is a huge problem too, but if we're only ever talking about the environment, it's just not going to be relevant to you if you're worrying about making it to the end of the week or having to juggle 2 jobs at once. I think one thing that we could really do to make it better is to make our policy making process more accessible. The fact that you have to come along to conference and that's far away, kind of expensive, isn't helping to make sure that our policy can be made by everyone. So definitely looking at decentralized systems for how we can get people to engage, and try and have more of like an open discussion and consultation, as opposed to closed off working groups where you have to have kind of got involved enough to know where to go for those. I think would make a huge difference. I don't know enough whether our policies are relevant or good enough at the moment to help those communities. So hopefully they are, because then we can reach out to those communities if we talk about them, but we'll see.
Thanks, Nick. And then finally, Amelia.
Such an important question, and I'd echo a lot of things that other people have said. I'm a proud union member, and as I said before, I work with the People's Assembly, which is a coalition of different groups and parties that challenge effectively policies that work against working class communities, ensuring that we are championing the best policies, but also scrutinising council and government policy that directly harms working people. I think that it's an interesting time to be having this conversation as well, because I think, you know, when you have an analysis of who is working class, it creates quite a stereotype. Whereas when you look at an analysis of who is working class in the UK, that person would be a black woman with a child. And I think it's really important that we are, when we're talking about class analysis, that we have an intersectional aspect of it, making sure that we're looking at all those intersects about how people are failed by government policy time and time again. You just need to look at coronavirus to see the huge divisions in our society, with some people stacking up their savings while other people can't put a roof over their head as a result of a pandemic that has meant that so many people have lost work and jobs. I think we know that we've got strong policies, the best policies for working people. And it's been incredible to work in communities on the doorstep and actually talking to people from hugely diverse, with hugely diverse backgrounds to ensure that we are getting that message across. But I think a class analysis is another important way of doing that. One other extra thing I would add as well is when you look at young people and how young people relate to a class analysis, they tend to fit more squarely into that more recent analysis that there are 7 different types of class, and young people tend to fit into the emergent service workers class, meaning that young people have high cultural they have high cultural access, but don't have much money. And I think it's also important to be thinking about these different analyses to make sure that we're strengthening our policies from all sections, rather than just kind of looking at a historic analysis of class, because I think that the modern problems need to be addressed in a whole different way.
Thank you, Amelia. So I'm going to move on to a very different topic now. One thing before we do that though is Facebook viewers, I now can see comments that you post on the video. So please, if you have any questions, join in the fun, join in the fray, and stick any questions in there, and I'll try and pick them up as we go along. And one other thing, just for the candidates, as I said at the beginning, I do want to create some back and forth between you. Unfortunately, I've not kind of identified a major point of disagreement yet to really tease out, which is perhaps a good thing. But nevertheless, if you do want to come back on anything that anybody else has said, then please just pop your hand up on the hand function on Zoom, or drop me a message, a private message in the chat, and we'll hopefully be able to come back on those things. There are some questions later on that I think there probably will be some disagreement on those, so maybe we'll save it till then. But before we get to those points, we've had a number of questions coming in advance about, I guess, the electoral prospects of the Green Party, and specifically looking at areas of the country where the Greens have perhaps performed less well in the past. So I'm going to focus on one of those questions, and this question came from Sean, and so Sean asks, what will you do to ensure that Greens break through into the Welsh Parliament next May, and elect more Green councillors across Wales in 2022? Now I'm going to go to the candidates in order of their proximity to Wales. And I think I know my geography well enough to do that. So I'm starting with Amelia on this. Has Amelia dropped off the call? Oh no, Amelia is there. I can see Amelia. Amelia, can you hear? You're on mute, Amelia.
Sorry, I'm having connection issues because I'm in Wales, and Wales isn't known for having good internet connection or mobile connection at all times. So I apologise. I'll sometimes need to take my video off. I only heard snippets of that question, but I believe it was the one that I saw in the chat that was about the Senedd elections.
Indeed, yeah.
Brilliant. So I'm the lead list candidate for South Wales East in the Welsh Assembly, in the Welsh Parliament elections, and I want to ensure that I use my platform as deputy leader to make sure we get as much exposure of the power of getting a Green into the Welsh Parliament. It will make history when we achieve that, and I think that fundamentally this is a point for us as a party that we need to ensure that we get somebody into the Welsh Parliament next year. But as was highlighted by the question, it's not just about that. We only have one councillor in Wales, and with a clear strategy across our different regions in Wales that are broken down for the parliamentary sections, that we can build on that and make sure that we have those bigger wins in the Welsh Council elections the year after. And those two things must feed into each other. So I've been working on strategy and making sure that we have our clear Green voice. I think I'm going to have a crowdfunder out soon, so please keep an eye out for that to make sure that we're able to basically put the resources behind this, because we have a proportional system in Wales. We have votes at 16. This should be our chance as Greens, and the Welsh Parliament so vitally needs the scrutiny and representation that the Green Party gives.
Thank you, Amelia. Next most proximate to Wales, I believe, is Cleo.
Please, can you repeat the question?
Yep, so the question is, what will you do to ensure that the Greens break through in the Welsh Parliament elections in May and get more Green councillors elected across Wales in 2022?
Well, that's all about supporting our candidates who are standing for election next year. I think that has to be prioritised because, as we've just heard, as I'm just learning, we don't have a strong elected presence in Wales, and that is an issue. Of course, we're here to represent England and Wales, so I very much hope that the concerns that are being experienced in Wales are being actioned and that we're able to support whilst we don't have we only have one elected councillor, then perhaps they need even more support. And so perhaps that should be a priority, along with, as I'm also learning, the sense of connectivity. And it is not acceptable that many areas in Wales, even where Amelia is tonight, do not have adequate connection or infrastructure for the internet to be able to access. So that is a huge concern. I was actually on the note of Cardiff, I guess, or more of the areas that are closer to Bristol. I was the candidate for Cardiff South and Penarth in the last, no, I wasn't the candidate, I was going to be a candidate. So I had considered particularly as well, when I didn't get selected as Bristol West candidate, that was an option to me. And it would be something that I would be very keen to pick up with down the line and get more involved, because I think there are so many issues across the UK that we all can understand, and that there'll be areas of Cardiff that are very diverse and would have absolutely lived experience that I can relate to. And I already know people there. I've also more recently become the Southwest Rep Officer for Greens of Colour, and we've actually decided that that will be South West and Wales. So I very much look forward to connecting and working with our communities in Wales, absolutely.
Brilliant, thanks Cleo. I think, and this is where my geography gets a bit ropey, I think Nick is the next closest to Wales.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I don't know enough of the specifics of how our funding is distributed around the different regions and countries of the party. I have a feeling that Wales is probably very underfunded, and I think the best people that are going to know how we can do better there is speaking to the people there and making sure we fully support them. If they think there's something we should do, we should do it, basically. No kind of like, oh, well, maybe not. Like, we have to trust the people there know what they're doing better than we do, because they know the issues locally a lot better than we can. Especially with the majority of the staff team for the Green Party being based around London, in London, and just outside of London. We know how huge it is to get a Green in the room. We know how it can change so much about the way people talk about policies. So I think it's definitely something that we should be focusing on. Arguably, it could be more significant than getting a second MP in Parliament, to be able to get one person in there. It is difficult to get people mobilised on the ground to Wales, as it is on the edge of the country, and to my understanding, the transport links aren't amazing. I think we should look at how we, especially with kind of the recent pandemic, how we can make sure we can get people digitally engaged more. That might be trying to find where we have people that are happy to provide skills, whether that's video editing or writing scripts, and trying to put stuff together so that we can create that material on a more volunteer basis. I think there's definitely a way we could expand digital engagement in campaigning, especially when, you know, if you're based in London, Wales is reasonably far away to travel to, and spending time there to go and then campaign in the day and then travel home, you're probably spending a similar amount of time traveling than you are actually campaigning.
Thanks, Nick. And then the furthest from Wales is Tom.
I think Amelia might have her hand up. I don't know if she wants to come back to what Nick said.
If we could take Tom first, and then I'll come to you, Amelia, if that's okay.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so as the furthest from Wales, I think I'd start by saying I need to learn more about the political landscape in the country. As Amelia said, it sounds like we do have a real opportunity to break through because of the PR, the proportional representation that they have. My impression is that Welsh Greens sometimes feel left out, and that the party is very London-centric, and that obviously needs addressing. And I think that's probably gone on for way too long. We need to make sure that our Welsh representatives are properly connected to colleagues in bodies like the Green Party Regional Council and Green Party Executive. I don't know that they are at the moment. I stood in a seat in 2018 that had not had much or any Green involvement. We certainly hadn't stood the last 2 times. And because we used Target to win so effectively, out of 5 candidates, I came second. And I think it was the Lib Dems who won. Oh no, it was the Conservatives who won, and they gave us free press because they were so surprised to see us. So I think that we should be able to replicate that kind of result through Target to win in certain places in Wales. And something I'd like to do if I was elected as deputy leader is to go around to lots of different local parties to speak to them and find out what they want from the party and who they need to be connected to become more effective, especially outside of the south of England, because most of my history has been in southwest, southeast and London. So it would be an educational experience for me, and I'd love to be able to throw myself in there.
Thanks, Tom. So I'm going to invite Amelia, if there was something you wanted to pick up on that you wanted to come back on, then please do.
There are parts of Wales that aren't that far away. From London, it's just a couple of hours. So in the Welsh Parliament elections, jump on a train. We'll make sure you have a fun day. There's beautiful landscapes, but it's really like there are parts of Wales that aren't well connected. But for the Welsh Parliament elections, we will make sure that it's as easy as possible to make sure you can get involved.
Thanks, Amelia. And I don't think that was particularly controversial, so I'm not going to invite either candidates to come back on it. But hopefully for those of you on the call from Wales and watching on Facebook in Wales, including the leader of the Welsh Green Party who's on the call tonight, that was an interesting conversation. And for those outside of Wales, please do obviously get involved in the Welsh Parliament elections next year. So we've got just shy of 30 minutes left, and I'm now going to move on to a question that I'm sure the candidates are sick of being asked, and I'm presuming they've been asked it quite a lot throughout this campaign. And I also think this might be the point where we get some disagreement between the candidates. So this has come in from a number of different people in advance, and I think I've seen it somewhere in the chat. So the question is, what will your approach to cooperation with other political parties be if you become deputy leader, and what are your thoughts on electoral alliances? So I'm going to start this one off with Nick.
Yeah, this is definitely one where people disagree. I think we should be trying to cooperate and work with other parties wherever possible, at every opportunity. I think it's how we're going to get elected. There's going to have to be some kind of agreement in order to make that happen under such a difficult system as first past the post. And I think that once we do get elected, at least for the first part, we'll have to work with other parties again in order to get things put through that will make huge changes for the UK. And even when we do eventually get to the point where proportional representation is used in Parliament, we shouldn't expect or particularly want to have a full Green majority, because I think that having collaboration, because in the proportional representation system, we'll still have to be collaborating with other parties. So we should definitely start collaborating now wherever we can. I do want to say on electoral alliances, I don't think we've made particularly good decisions in the past on electoral alliances. Electoral alliances don't have to mean we stand a candidate somewhere, you don't, and then you stand a candidate somewhere and we don't. There are definitely ways that we can work around being able to stand a candidate everywhere, because I think it's really important to give everyone the option to vote Green. It's just working out where with, for example, the Lib Dems, we can prioritise our resources and say, like, we're going to focus a lot here, and then they can say we're going to focus a lot here. So instead of it being about standing down, it will be about where we're going to focus our resources. That's all I have to say, really. Collaboration is really important, and I think it's the kind of politics we want to see in our communities too. So we should be showing that we want that by demonstrating it in our politics as well.
Thank you, Nick. So I'm now going to come to Tom.
Thank you. So just to start, people might be interested to hear that I wrote about this for Bright Green a little while ago. So do Google my name, Bright Green, and Progressive Alliance or something like that, because then you can see my full views on this. I would say that, and I've said this multiple times because this has come up at a lot of hustings, we're the electoral wing of the environmental movement and, to a lesser extent, the social justice movement. So that means that we need to stand and ask for votes in every place that we possibly can do in England and Wales. And if we don't stand, that will breed complacency from the other parties, which will mean that they pay lip service to renewables or climate change or those kind of things, rather than having a holistic attitude towards addressing the climate emergency and social inequality. Definitely yes to cooperating with other parties where it is of a direct benefit to people, like, for instance, if you hold the balance of power in a local council, and that if you cooperate with another party, then you can help them perhaps be more ambitious in their particular policy proposal and vote that through at the local council or parish council or whatever. I definitely don't support electoral pacts now. I might have done in the past, but we've obviously experimented with it 2 or 3 times at Westminster elections, and it's clearly not worked. I think we need to be ambitious and to say that we do definitely want everyone to vote for us, because we do have a fantastic policy platform. But do look up my article, because that will tell you more about what I think.
Thanks, Tom. And yes, I would encourage everyone to read Bright Green as often as you possibly can. So I'm going to come to Cleo on this one next.
Right, and this is about whether we should work with other parties, is that right?
Yeah, so the question is, what will be your approach to cooperation with the political parties if you become deputy leader, and what are your thoughts on electoral alliances?
Right, well, electoral alliances, I think there has to be certain things that are non-negotiable, certain parts of our ethos which can be reflected in our policy. If they're not in line with another party, then I don't think it's wise to align with them. I think in reality, we do work cross-party on a number of things in a number of areas. We certainly do it at a local level in councils, where we often put motions through on a cross-party basis, particularly obviously when we do not have a majority, but also when it's clear that there is a consensus across political persuasions that this is the right policy, this is the right movement, this is the right action, and people will get behind it. But for example, getting a whole council behind the climate emergency declaration that first came out of Bristol and then went up and down the country, just because you work cross-party on something still doesn't mean you're going to see adequate results until, we hope, when we're at the helm, we can actually drive these things forward. So there are failings of even when you do go into these such agreements. I think what is also important to note, as I've alluded to earlier, that many of our campaigns and some of the great work we're doing, actually, that has come about through collaboration with grassroots organisations. Many grassroots organisations are not politically aligned. So we have to be prepared to work with these campaigns who may also be working with others in order to get the policies and the change through. I think I would always reflect on what the end goal is and being very, very clear on that. So I think a lot of our work until we get more elected seats is, of course, continuing to campaign, continuing to lobby, continuing to put our messaging out there, which, you know, is rubbing off on other people and is being adopted. And finally, I already work with other parties because, being a local councillor, you're part of the LGA, and we often come into contact and work with others from different political parties. And being a member of the Avon Fire Authority, that is made up of a cross-section of all political backgrounds, but we work together, usually with little disagreement, more of late, to come up with the policy that will keep our community safe. So we all have that in common.
Thanks, Cleo. And then finally on this one, it's Amelia.
I think it's important that we analyse this from three different angles. That's campaigning, local and national. So on a campaigning basis, we will work cross-party. I work cross-party on a regular basis to make sure that we're scrutinising the government and using our voice as Greens and people who have shared interests by working with MPs and peers on specific issues, usually on women's rights or the environment. And I think it's really important that when we have shared values, that we amplify that message, because by collaborating, we can work to win. On a national basis, which this question, I believe, is based on, I think I've essentially, when it came to the kind of progressive alliance work, I personally voted against doing that work. I think that what we need to do as Greens is get our bold green vision out there. And with a snap general election, then we were losing time to be able to do that. However, it was a tough decision, and you as a membership made the decision that you wanted that work to happen. You made that on a national basis and on a local basis, and I will always respect the decisions that you as members make, because I know that you work on councils and you have these discussions for council elections as well. And locally, you're the best people to make the best decisions on what that looks like. Obviously, we collaborate on policy. One of the reasons why environmental policy is so strong in the European Parliament is because collaboration is at the heart of that policy making. But obviously, as Cleo outlined, we do that on a council level as well. But I want to highlight that we actually worked on a progressive arrangement in Wales in 2016, because we had UKIP rising in the polls and had the potential and did go on to win seats. We realised that by fragmenting our votes, that we were allowing far-right ideas into the Welsh Parliament. I think that when people from UKIP were using racist dog whistles to undermine people in our diverse community, then it was vital that we had those conversations to make sure that we were doing the best thing and ensuring that we were able to work together, because it was, I feel it was more important to ensure that our vote was counted in a different way. We were basically looking at the list seats and the constituency seats to try and make sure that we thought about what the best deal was. And I think that collaboration would have been a better thing for Wales, a better thing for politics, to have not given a platform to people who use that kind of dog whistle to advance their own agendas. And I think that on a personal level, I will always want to make sure that we get our clear green message out there, but I will always appreciate the local decisions you make, because I know it's tough. I know they're tough decisions. I know that a lot of thought goes into them, a lot of understanding, and we're a grassroots party. And that's what I really love about who we are as Greens.
Thanks, Amelia. So I've had Tom request to come back on some of these points, so I'm going to invite them to jump in now.
Thank you. Yeah, just on the point about local people, local Greens who might be working in certain contexts with other political parties, just to preface this with the fact that conference is the ultimate authority in the Green Party, but local parties in England and Wales, in the England and Wales Green Party, do have a huge level of autonomy, and rightly so. And where they choose to work with other political parties, you know, most often for the benefit of local communities, then absolutely go for it. What I would say is that we need to be really careful, if this does happen again, that we don't appear to or do make decisions from on high and impose decisions on local parties, because I know that certain local parties felt like they weren't communicated with about the last electoral alliance, and they felt like the hard work that they'd been putting in, because, you know, the absolutely vast majority of us are volunteers who use our evenings and weekends to campaign on something that we care passionately about. They felt like they were just told to not campaign, and that voters should be voting for a party that they might passionately disagree with. So I think that we need to be really sensitive about the wishes of local parties if we do this kind of thing again.
As that was partially a sort of direct response to some of the things Amelia was saying, I'm going to invite Amelia if you wanted to respond to any of that first, and then I'll invite Nick and Cleo to come in on any of it if you want to as well.
No, I think it makes sense. And as somebody that wasn't as involved with the Progressive Alliance, then I feel that I'm not here to try and defend what happened. I think that it was really important that we did go to the local parties and check with them as well, rather than imposing from the top. So local parties were allowed to vote, and I think that was an important level of what was added there. But I do agree that I think that there's people geared up for a general election. I think that that's, like I said, why we need to make sure that we get our clear green vision out there. I've always said that for me, my absolute priority in my job is to ensure that we have a green government. And I think that that's the priority of so many people. I appreciate it's not going to happen in 2024, but unless we're planning to do that, then we're going to fail to address inequality while staying below 1.5 degrees of warming and tackle the ecological emergency. But I also appreciate why Caroline Lucas is frustrated as being a lone Green, and how we have tried to think differently on how we get that representation, that green representation that we so truly deserve and that the country does so vitally need. And so I think it's like I said, these are tough decisions for everybody. And I think that the fact that we have tried shows the fact that we're willing to work slightly differently, but ultimately we just need to continue our work to make sure that we have a proportional system and ensure that every single person's votes counts, because I think that we were trying to make sure that we were smart about how we worked, but maybe sometime in the future people will want to talk differently, but I hope that's not the case, because I hope that we get a proportional system, and I know that everybody running is passionate about that as well.
Thank you, Amelia. I've just seen that Cleo has dropped off the call. I'm just letting her back in now. Hopefully you can hear us again, Cleo. So before I move on to something else, Nick, I just wanted to really quickly ask if there's anything in that you wanted to come back on at all.
Yeah, I wanted to say that, yes, I also agree that local parties at the end of the day should have that decision making. I think that the policy we have based around decentralizing politics is one of our strongest policies, and it reaches into so many different things. including, like, for example, UBI is effectively us saying, you know better how you could spend this money than we do. Like, and also when we're talking about giving money to local councils, they know better their area than anyone else, so they would know how to spend it best. I think that definitely the decision will be down to those local parties to make those decisions. But at the same time, I want to, as deputy leader, be there trying to get those offers for them. I want to be doing the work and approaching other parties to say, is there something we can work out here? It might be we go and find something and we go, we think this is kind of good, what do you guys think? And they reject it. That's totally fine. I'm very happy if that happens. I don't have a problem. I may have like a suggestion of like, I think this is maybe good, but the people in the local community will certainly know better.
Thanks, Nick. Cleo, I know you dropped off the call a little bit there, but is there anything final you wanted to say on the electoral alliances question?
No, I'm conscious that we've only just got 10 minutes left.
Great.
So happy to.
Thanks, Cleo. So before we move on to one of our final questions, I have a quick fire round follow up on this electoral alliances question. So recognizing that it's not going to be wholly within your power, as we've talked about, as to whether or not the Green Party enters into future alliances in general elections. I want in one word, and the words are yes, no, or maybe. Would you like to see the Green Party going into future electoral alliances in general elections? And you've only allowed one word. I'm going to start with Nick.
I will say yes.
It's a yes from Nick. Tom?
No.
No from Tom. Cleo?
No.
And Amelia?
Maybe.
So there's the disagreement. We've got 2 no's, 1 yes, and a maybe. Great. So I've got 2 questions, 2 final questions before we wrap up. So please do keep your answers as brief as you can and as concise as you can so we can get through both of them. So the first of these 2 is how can the Green Party best attract Labour voters disillusioned by Keir Starmer's leadership? I'm going to start with Cleo on this one, and as I said, please be as concise and brief as possible. Before I do go to you, Cleo, I just wanted to say, please, folks, please don't get into lengthy discussions about patriarchy and colonialism in the chat. They're both really important issues, but it's going to be distracting for people trying to hear from the candidates. We can all discuss patriarchy and colonialism on social media later and on the pages of Bright Green as well. We're always taking submissions, so if you want to pitch something on patriarchy or colonialism, please do. But Cleo, in the meantime, how can the Green Party best attract Labour voters disillusioned by Keir Starmer's leadership?
I think it's about getting out into communities, having a presence, working with campaigns that are already on the ground, doing the work that we wish to do that also reflect our policies, and having visible leadership to give people that choice and that confidence that we are the party that we say we are, when we say that we are here to represent a wealth of experience, very diverse range of views and voices, but this needs to be reflected in the leadership so that people can have confidence that we're actually walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Thanks, Cleo. So I'm going to Amelia next.
Yeah, another good question. And I think that it's been interesting because we had a small increase in, well, our best month, sorry, I'll start from the start. In June, we had our best month for members, and that was new members who were coming from the Labour Party. And I think it's interesting that we are attracting people sometimes back, sometimes as new members at the moment when there's a vacuum of left ideas and challenging kind of proper scrutiny from a left perspective, that we are attracting people back. I think that it's really important that we keep speaking out on those key issues, especially at the moment. We are an anti-austerity party. We will not we will not support any kind of austerity, and it's important that we are speaking out every time there is any mention of any kind of austerity programme that will be highlighted by this government, and I'm sure it will happen. I'm sure that we're all convinced it will happen. But we need to be that message needs to be coming out as loudly as possible. And as Greens, it's very tough to get media. So I think it's really important that while we're speaking out, we each have a duty to make sure that our clear policies are heard in all of our forums. And we've all got a duty to be making sure that we speak out on these issues, because I've seen Labour councils vote for cuts in even Oxford, criminalising homelessness, these kind of Labour values that have just been undermined by elected members of the Labour Party. I'm not surprised that people are coming back to us or coming to join us again, because with Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, there was an element of hope. And to be honest, we were always the beacon of hope. We've kept burning brightly, and now I think people are realising that we are their true political home.
Thanks, Amelia. Going to go to Nick now.
Yeah, I think a lot of the problem we have is we do talk about the environment, and I think if we talk about social justice a lot more and kind of get the message out there, then there are people that will be reminded that we are a great option for delivering social justice, where Labour is moving away from having such good policy on that. I think generally I would prefer to try and reach out to people like climate strikers instead of trying to get people who are on the left of Labour, because I think that it would be more useful in terms of getting our success overall. But I think a lot of members will happen to kind of naturally move over anyway to join us, because my perspective is that Keir Starmer is just, moving them away, and people come to their own terms that it's not the place for them.
Thanks, Nick. And then finally, Tom.
Thank you. This is something that has never not surprised me, about how many young radical eco-socialists there are in Labour who fundamentally disagree with a lot of what Labour does. And I regularly speak to people in Labour who are tempted to leave but don't for some reason. That reason probably being that they feel like they're closer to power, but at what cost? So obviously individuals need to have a conversation with themselves about how much they're willing to compromise. I think that we need to be really clear about our politics as Greens, about being for social justice, for anti-austerity, being anti-capitalist, but as I said earlier, we don't necessarily need to use those words. We can talk more about things like rent controls and universal basic income on top of a reform welfare state. We need to have more visibly diverse spokespeople, particularly in terms of class, not just having lots of middle class people. I've written about this topic about how we politically position ourselves and how we attract Labour members in Left Foot Forward today. So please do Google that. I've got a lot of content out there at the moment. Labour is still tied to infinite economic growth, and they're apparently reviewing their relatively ambitious policy of net zero by 2030. So they're obviously slipping, and we should be capitalising on that. That's what I'd say. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. And yeah, just to echo, please do Google Left Foot Forward as well. As Tom says, Bright Green's part of a wider kind of left media ecology, which Left Foot Forward is a really important part of. But make sure you Google it after you Google Bright Green. So I've got one final question for you all, which is, and this is the only one that I'm going to apply a time limit for. You're going to be as short as possible in like 20 to 30 seconds. I want you to, and this is like the fun bit at the end of the news, about like a giraffe that's lost its like beach ball or whatever. So the question is relatively straightforward. What's the thing you've done in your life that you're most proud of, and why? In 20 to 30 seconds, I'm going to go with the order that we started in. So it is Nick to go first.
I think the most proud thing I did was 4 years ago, I think, I decided to go vegan. Before, I didn't really know much about our impact on the environment or anything like that. And taking that on myself to say, I can make a change and I can do it. And it's taught me so much about ethics as well, not just originally I was brought in by the environment, but now learning about the ethics behind it as well has really helped shape my understanding of philosophy, which I apply to all of my politics now.
Thanks, Nick, and very timely. Cleo.
One of the things I'm most proudest of is, whilst during my term as the Lord Mayor of Bristol, I made the decision that it was time for the portraits of enslavers and people who have committed crimes against humanity to be removed from public view in City Hall. I'm really glad I took that stand, because I realised that it's really encouraged and given some hope to many people, not just here in the UK and across all different ethnicities, for the symbology of it. But sometimes we do things that may be quite important here, but they actually have a really big significance internationally, as I discover, where people do not have many of the privileges we have of speaking out, let alone taking action. So that's something that is part of history. And yeah, I'm proud that I took that stance.
Brilliant. Thank you, Cleo. Tom?
Something I'm proud of in 20 seconds is when I went from 0 to second place in Three Rivers Green Party and managed to convince nearly 400 people to vote Green, probably for the first time.
Excellent. Thanks, Tom. And finally, Amelia.
Mine's my work on misogyny as a hate crime. First of all, I worked genuinely cross-party with people and campaigners like Helen Pankhurst to make sure that this was on the agenda. But also for me, it meant that I was able to reclaim my experiences of domestic violence and try and make sure that other women's lives were made better and ensure that we were challenging a status quo of misogyny directed towards women.
Thank you all, and thank you for your pithy responses. You've shown that you can speak at great length and in great conciseness, and still speak very eloquently and put a point across. And I just wanted to echo the comments that are coming through in the chat now about congratulating all the candidates as well. Unfortunately, this is all that we've got time for this evening, but I've got a few quick final things I want to say before I let you get off and enjoy your evening.